Specifically on where I see some of the issues, I suppose I have about 6 or 7 issues. I'll briefly go through them. On the question of social institutions, I'd like to make it clear that I do not believe IORP should be treated purely as a financial institution. They're not. They're a European pension provision which brings together employers, employees, in an alliance, really, as part of the European social contract. And I think we need to represent that and reflect that in the course of the text that we attempt to bring through Parliament. So the social aspects of IORPs are clearly represented through the relationship between the employer and the employee, and I think we can't lose that, because we have many, many schemes, historical schemes, that have been delivering results for people, and I don't think in the context of this regulation we should lose that. Secondly, within the IORP directive, we have an opportunity, in my view, to promote long-term investment through safe and equitable occupational pension systems. If one looks at the potential of LTIFs, the FC proposal, the Juncker plan, which only went through Parliament last week, that Europe is coming into a new phase of opportunity, and I think we've got to use the long-term vehicles within the context of the report to get the very best. On solvency requirements, I have made it clear publicly that stringent solvency requirements will not form part of my report. And I welcome the fact that the Commission and the Council have not included insurance-like solvency standards within IORP 2. I think the way in which gaps are resolved is ultimately in growing the economy, not putting more and more cost on schemes, or more and more cost on governments, member states, or more and more cost on existing members of those IORPs. The way in which we deal with gaps over a period of time is to grow the economy. So that's an issue that I'm very clear about, and given the fact that the Council have an agreement on this, I think we need to be mindful of the kind of negotiation that occurred around the Council table as a means of getting that result. On fully funded requirements, the requirement in the directive that all cross-border IORPs should be fully funded at all times needs to be looked at. It's not a good instrument, quite frankly, that only 84 schemes have come from the original text in 2003, and we've got to ask ourselves the question, why is it the case that we haven't seen more cross-border IORPs? I speak to many people in the pension industry, people who advise different schemes, and they make the point it's a nightmare trying to explain to people the different regulatory environment. Now, I think it's logical, if we have an emerging single market in this area, which we should be trying to encourage for all kinds of reasons, certainty, economies of scale, making sure that we have schemes where big European companies, I make the argument consistently, this actually fits in with the agenda of growing European businesses. Larger European businesses that have a foothold in a number of countries need cross-border IORPs as a means of delivering for their workforce. And it seems to me logical that we should have in play we should look at the question of fully funded. Now, I want to say in anything I say today, my report will be issued to my colleagues and then published. So I'm not giving any definitive position on this today, but I'm just sort of explaining what's in my mind right now. And we need to look at this question again to see whether or not we can find a solution without creating artificial advantages for one country over the next in terms of pension funds leaving that country, and I'm conscious of that as well. On delegated acts, we have to be aware that pensions are primarily a matter for member states. This directive is really about a minimised harmonisation standard or directive, and because of the sensitivity, as I said, to a small number of member states, I'll have to consider the usefulness of the delegated acts within this proposal. On professional qualifications and external depositories, the Commission has produced harmonisation in areas where it may not necessarily be desired or justified, particularly in relation to professional qualification standards and external depositories. So these are issues that I'm going to have to examine closely, and indeed with my colleagues, the shadow rapporteurs, also in September and October. On information requirements, I personally think that the Commission's approach to better inform members about their pension schemes and entitlements is very welcome. However, it's questionable if we need the full level of detail that's in the original proposal, and we need to ask ourselves the questions of proportionality and appropriateness in ultimately deriving a result, especially on the pension benefit statement, which is important that we get that right as well. And then finally, on cross-border provisions themselves, one thing that needs to be looked at is how we define what exactly a cross-border activity means. We don't have that definition in the original text. We need to look at that again, because I think it would help long-term to have that certainty in terms of the cross-border scheme. So that's a run-through of some of the major issues. My final concluding remark is this, that what the pensions industry and what workers and employers need right now is certainty. We've come through a 5-year roller coaster ride of new regulations and the retrofitting of the Euro project, understandable and all as that was. I think we've got to deliver that certainty in a very uncertain world. And I'm conscious, given the sensitivity of member states to this issue, that we produce a balanced and proportionate response, which will not only provide good consolidation in legislation, because as a member of the Irish Parliament for nearly 18 years, it is crucially important that you look back and you revisit what's worked, what hasn't worked. We have a responsibility to consolidate, but we also have a responsibility to give that certainty to members of pension schemes and those schemes, a group of people who have, as I said in my opening remarks, put away deferred income. We need to be very conscious of that in the current circumstance. Thank you very much.